Hey, good morning. I'm Case, and I want to welcome you to Stonehill Church Online. Over the next 40 to 45 minutes, we're going to have the opportunity to sing some worship together. We're going to have the opportunity to hear a great message from our lead pastor, Doug. And our hope for you during this time is that you would be able to fully engage with that. I know that for many of you, you're at home and you're surrounded by potential distractions. But regardless of what those distractions are, our hope for you would be that you'd be able to genuinely worship during this time, that you'd be able to sing along with us, and that you'd be able to stay connected during the message. So to help with that, we encourage you to download our Stonehill app. Go to any of your app stores, regardless of what device you're on, download our app, and you can follow along with message notes on there, with song lyrics, and we would love for you to stay connected that way. Lastly, we encourage you to stay connected through the chat feature of whatever platform you're on. We want to hear from you, so let us know that you're here, send a like, and let's stay connected. Let's stand together, let's sing as Trev and the band lead us this morning.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Stonehill Church. We are so stoked that you're joining us today. We want today to be just a time of connection with you and God. We want you to worship. We want you to have an experience with us today. And also, if you have a prayer request, just leave it in the comment section. We want to care for you today. Would you sing? I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures of faith were never enough. You came along. You came along. Together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. There's nothing better than you. is nothing, nothing is better than you. We sing it all together. No, there's nothing, hey, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into hours. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Yes, God, we give you praise. Give him honor and glory. Oh, I count on one thing. Oh, I count on one thing. The same God who never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh, yes, I will. Hey. I will give you praise for all my days. 'Cause I count on one thing, just one thing. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me
Well, thanks so much for singing with us today. We absolutely believe that God hears our cries, and as we sing together, there's so much power in a group of people coming together to sing to God. High schoolers, we want to remind you today that we're going to be meeting at Table Rock, at the old penitentiary down below Table Rock, at 4 p.m. to be able to go on a hike together, to spend some time together, to be in community. So we'd love for you to join us. And lastly, for those of you who have continued to give faithfully during this season, we just want to say thank you. You've allowed Stonehill to continue to impact this community in a mighty way, to partner with so many ministry partners and to continue to support them. God's using your generosity to make a difference in people's lives. If you would like to give today, you're welcome to do that on our mobile app or go to stonehill.church. This week we start a new series that Doug's going to lead us through called Afterlife. We're excited about it, so check this out as we get ready to hear from him.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining us online today. We are at a new location recording this morning. We are at Coffee, Paint, and Repeat. It's downtown Meridian, and they're letting us film here. And so thank you so much for joining us. Today we were hoping to start back inside at Mountain View, but as many of you know, Ada County went back to stage 3 with the corona pandemic, and so we're holding that off. We are still meeting outside, and so that's awesome. And if you would like to join us next Sunday, July 5th, we would love for you to join us at 11 a.m. at Mountain View High School. That would be awesome. But today we're really excited because we are starting the new series called Afterlife. Afterlife. This past week I had a dream, and it was an interesting dream. I went to heaven, and Simon Peter met me at the gates. And so he began to tour me around heaven, and we went into this large room, and it had these clocks all over the wall. There was like 1,000 different clocks, but they were interesting because they only had one arm. And just so you know, this is totally a true story, okay? So I'm up in heaven, and I asked Simon Peter, I said, Simon, why in the world are all these clocks hanging on the wall? Why do they only have one arm? And he said, well, that's interesting, Doug, because these clocks are not actually clocks. They are called centimeters. And he said, basically what it is, there's a centimeter for each person, and every time they sin, the arm moves around on the clock one time, just like that. And I go, interesting. And so I began to kind of look at the different clocks and look at the different people, and I saw some of you. And some of you I was like really pleased with. You did awesome in this department. And some of you, I'm like, oh, you're struggling a little bit. So I went and looked at Trev Wilson, our worship director's centimeter, and I was just really interested in how it went for him. And so I looked at his, and it actually had quite a bit of movement. Zoop, zoop, pretty quick. And I was like, I wonder what Zach Brogdon's, he's our high school director, I wonder what his is like. So I go look at Zach's, and fortunately there wasn't quite as much movement, but still there was some movement, a little slower. And then I was like, I wonder what my wife, Heather, I wonder what her centimeter is like. So I went and found her centimeter, and there were cobwebs all over it. And so I was like, oh, good for her. But then I started looking for my centimeter, and I could not find mine anywhere. So I go up to Peter, and I said, Peter, where in the world is my centimeter at? He's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, Doug. We use your centimeter in the kitchen as a fan. Now I'm laughing by myself because you guys are here with me right now, but I thought that was pretty funny. Actually, it's a pretty silly story, but the reality is when it comes to the afterlife, so many people have different ideas of what heaven's like, and so many people have different ideas of what happens after we pass on from this life. And so today, we're going to start in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. I would love for you to turn there. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And here's what's really important, and I want you to get this, is this, that what you believe about the afterlife will determine how you live this life. Let me say that again. What you believe about the afterlife will determine what you and how you live this life. You see, people, they believe all kinds of different things. I think about people that call themselves atheists. They believe that when you die, that you are done, that you are worm dirt, that you are pushing up daisies, that when this life is done for you, there is nothing that comes afterwards. There's some people that believe in something called purgatory. You know, that if you're not good enough to go to heaven, you go to this place called purgatory. And if you have good friends or you have people that are praying you out of purgatory, you might be able to get out of there. You have different religions that teach different things, like Islam. Islam teaches this, that if your good outweighs your bad, then you get to go to a place called paradise. But if your bad outweighs your good, then you go to hell. Some people believe that when you die that you become an angel. And so they have this picture of this big, fat, bald, naked baby angel in their mind playing a harp in heaven. And that's what you think of heaven. See, there's all kinds of different views about the afterlife. I think the thing that we need to wrestle with today is, what does the Bible say about the afterlife? What does God say about the afterlife? And so the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about the afterlife. Next week, we want you to pay attention, because we're going to talk about heaven and how amazing and wonderful it is. And so you don't want to miss that. In a couple weeks, we're going to talk about hell and what hell is like. And so you don't want to miss as we talk about that. And then on the fourth week, we're going to do something fun. We're going to do some questions and answers. And so what we're asking you to do is to send us your questions about the afterlife. It can be anything. Ask us about, will people be married in heaven? Will there be sex in heaven? I mean, these are questions that people ask. And so we would love for you below, if you're watching this right now, below in the comments section, to write some questions in. And we're going to look, and we're going to look through the comments and pull out some of the questions. Or you can email the questions to info@stonehill.church, info@stonehill.church. And then we'll take all the questions, and we're going to pick out some, and we'll do the whole service and the whole series on that. That'll be a lot of fun. So look forward to that. But today, I want to start out in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1. And Paul is going to give us the foundation of what we're going to talk about the next few weeks. So 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, I would love for you to follow along as we read this together. Paul says this, "For we know that if the earthly tent..." Now let me stop there. What does he mean by the earthly tent? The earthly tent is a metaphor for these physical bodies of ours, okay? It's the physical bodies that we live in today. He says, "For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands." Like, we know as Christ followers that one day this body will pass away, but we'll receive this new glorified, glorious body. And we look forward to that. And then we look down at verse 6. Paul says, "Therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, that we are away from the Lord." We know that if we are in this earthly body, we're not in our permanent home yet, residing with God all the time in heaven. He goes, "But we live by faith, not by sight." We don't see it yet, but we believe it by faith. And then he goes on and he says, "We are confident." I want you to say that right now, real strong. We're confident. We're confident. We're confident, I say, Paul says, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. Paul says, I would rather be in heaven with the Lord. So the question is, why are we still here on this earth? Or even when we are in heaven, why are we there? What is our purpose? And he goes on and tells us in verse 9. He says, "So we make it our goal to accumulate a lot of money." No, that's not what it says. No, he says, our goal is to make a name for ourselves and have as big of social media following as we possibly can. No, that's not what it says. No, it says, "So we make it our goal to have a house with a beautiful shiplap wall." I know how to practice that word for hours because I did not want to say that one wrong. No, he doesn't say that either. He says, "So we make it our goal to please Him." To please Him. Whether we are at home in the body, we're in this physical body, or we are away from it. What Paul is saying, regardless of whether eternity starts now or in the afterlife, or whether we're living in this physical body now or we're a glorified body. Regardless of where we are made, we are created, we live, and our goal is to please God. That's our purpose. And then he says in verse 10, and he begins to give us a little bit more of a picture of the afterlife. He says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ." Now hold on, we'll get to that in a minute. He says, "So that each of us may receive what is due for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad." So today, we're not going to be able to tackle everything, heaven and hell and all the things that come along with the end times and eschatology, but we'll be able to tackle some of these things in the next few weeks. My goal for today is to give us an introduction of really the start of the afterlife. Give us an introduction of what happens when this life here on earth ceases to exist. So I want to give you 3 just really simple and practical but very important points today. So as you're taking notes on your app, or as you're listening on the podcast, or you're listening on YouTube, Facebook, here's the first thought. The first thought is this, that death is inescapable. Death is inescapable. It's going to happen. We see the writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 9:27, just as people are destined to die once, and after that to face the judgment. You see, they've done this really robust study lately, and they've determined this, that they found out that 1 out of every 1 person, they all die. They all die. Everyone dies, right? We all die of something. Now, we all don't know what we're going to die of, and we would prefer to die of certain things over other things. Like, I'm deathly scared of snakes, and I have a fear of dying from a snake. I don't know what you have a fear of dying. The other day, last week, I was was mowing my lawn at my house, and all of a sudden I hear this sound, and I see this thing spit out of the lawnmower, and I'm like, what in the world? I go look at it. It was a snake. It was a snake in my backyard. Now, here's the thing. It was dead, but I was still scared of it. I was still afraid of it. I actually made my 7-year-old daughter get a stick and move it because I just didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to be near it, right? We're all fearful of something. We're all going to die of something. I actually did some intense research this week, and I found out that there are more people that actually die of coconuts falling on their head than you would think. There are actually quite a few people in the world that die each year of champagne corks. There are people that actually die, get this, because they fall off their toilets. Now, why did they do that? What in the world was happening? What was going on? I mean, we don't know. Maybe they were looking at Facebook sideways and they just fell. I don't know. There are people, this is true, that actually die every year of getting their head stuck in a vending machine trying to get something out of it. It's crazy, right? And this is why we go to church, to hear important information like this. The point is this. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. And here's the second biblical truth. It's this, is that our souls, and this is super, super important, our souls last forever. Our souls last forever. You see, when we die, when we breathe our last breath on this earth, our body and our souls, they separate. That in yourself, in your essence, that you are not your body. We live in this skin. And some of your skin is beautiful, and it's bronzed, and it's tan, and it's smooth. And then some of us, our skin is pasty white. We aren't as blessed. But the reality is, regardless of what your skin is, it's temporary. We live in this temporary, Paul called it a tent. It's not permanent. It's temporary. And one day, our bodies will physically die. Will physically die, but your soul lives on. And if someone is at your funeral and they're making preparations for your funeral, they're ready for the reception, and they get the fruit salad and they get the sandwiches from Costco, you still will be very much alive. Your soul will continue on. That's something very important that the Bible teaches us. Jesus illustrates this when he goes to a friend of a funeral. His friend's Lazarus. And he gets to the funeral, and Mary and Martha, they're upset and they're frustrated because Jesus hadn't come for 4 days after he died. And he goes to see the body. And it was interesting because in the King James Version, it says this. It says that his body stinketh. That is the actual word for it, right? And so Jesus is comforting Mary. He's comforting Martha. But he's also teaching us a very important spiritual truth about our souls. He says this in John 5:25. He says, Jesus said to her, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me, he says, will never die. What does he mean? He means your soul, it continues on after our physical bodies die. See, our souls last forever. Here's the third, and I think a very, very important biblical truth about the afterlife. It's this. We will all be judged. We will all be judged. This is very, very important. There's multiple verses in the Bible that let us know this. I'll give you a couple. Hebrews chapter 9:27. I read this a minute ago, but it says this. Just as people are destined to die once, right? And after that, to face what? Judgment. 1 Peter 4:5, Peter talks about the judgment. He says, but they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. I don't care who you are, how good or how bad you are, there will come a day where we will all be judged. Now, that can be a little nerve-wracking for many of us because we don't like to be judged. That's a little scary. A few years ago, before we actually planted Stonehill Church, and we were trying to pray through whether or not it was a good idea to plant Stonehill Church, I went to this church planting assessment in Boston, Massachusetts. And at this assessment, they looked into everything about me and my wife to determine whether or not we were good. We had the competency, we had the ability to be able to start a church and for it to be effective. And so they looked at everything. They looked at our philosophy of ministry. They looked at our relationships. They just looked at everything. And one of the things that they had me do is they kind of had me do this preaching, but they did it the American Idol style. And so this was it was like really kind of just, it was freaky, to be honest with you. So they had me stand up in front of this panel of judges. And in addition to that, I stood up in front of an audience and I gave a 7-minute message. Some of you were like, why can't we do that right now? I get it, right? So a 7-minute message, and I will tell you, it was the best 7-minute message ever, or at least I thought. And so I give this message, and I'm all pumped up, man, like, oh yeah. And we get to the point where the judges start to give me, I guess, criticism or give me help about how to be better. And so they began to give me some encouragement. They began to give me some of the things that I did good at, but then they started kind of give me some things I needed to work on. They're like, Doug, your shirt that you're wearing is too distractive. Doug, your jokes, they're not very funny. Doug, you need to stay on point. Doug, your message was too long. And some of you right now, I know what you're doing. You're judging me and you're thinking the exact same thing. And none of us, we don't like to be judged. We don't like to have criticism, but I really want us to understand, what does the Bible say about this judgment? I think that we can have a skewed view of really what God is intending the judgments to be. And so people offer different opinions. There's all kinds of different opinions on what the judgments will be in the afterlife. And so I'm going to give you what many very biblical conservative scholars think, and I would say I agree with this belief and this theology. And there's two different main types of judgments that many of us will experience in the afterlife. And the first one is called this. It's called the Great White Throne Judgment. The Great White Throne Judgment, the question is, who will be there? You see, there's a debate among many people, but many scholars believe that this judgment is reserved for only those who are non-believers, for those who are not Christians, that have never put their faith and their trust into Jesus Christ. And so John talks about this in Revelation chapter 20, verse 11. And I want you to hear about this great white throne judgment. John says, "Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. And the earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. And anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. You see, the great white throne judgment takes place after death. After death. And for the people that are there, there is a book there. It's called the book of life. And if your name is not written in the book of life, it was because that person never made a decision to surrender their life to Jesus Christ, to put their faith into Jesus and in Jesus alone. These people will not experience the splendor of heaven. In addition to that, if your name is not written in the book of life, the Bible says that you will be cast into, the Greek word is actually limne pure. It's translated the lake of fire, or translated as hell, or translated as eternal separation from God in a literal place, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. I will say this, that you do not want to be at the great white throne judgment. That's not a place that you would want to be. The second judgment, though, is actually called the judgment seat of Christ. It's called the judgment seat of Christ. And the judgment seat of Christ is a place where people who are Christ followers, they will be judged, but not on whether they should be in heaven or not. That will already be determined by the decisions that we make here in this life, on this planet, on this earth. But they will be judged either worthy or not worthy of rewards in heaven based upon how we lived our life. It's really honestly more of a celebration. It's actually more exciting. And Paul speaks about this judgment seat of Christ a couple different times. And Paul's speaking to the believers in Romans chapter 14, verse 10. And he says this to the believers. He says, "For we all will stand before the judgment seat of God." Or again, he's speaking to believers in 2 Corinthians 5:10, which we read just a little while ago. He said, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ." Now, what does this mean? What is judgment seat of Christ? If you take this word judgment seat, you take it back to the Greek, it actually comes from the word bema. And what is really interesting as you dig down a little deeper and you unpack what this word really was and what it is there was these Greek Olympics that they would do. And so when somebody won the Greek Olympics, what they would do is they would have this seat, or they would have this kind of stair where they would step up. That's what bema means. It means to actually step up. And they would step up, and then the judge would come over, and they would take an olive crown and place it on the winner's head, signifying their reward for the great job they had done. It's a beautiful picture of what happens for Christians when we live our life according to God's plan for us. And there are certain things that we do in this life not to receive a reward of heaven, because we can't do that on our own. That's received by when Christ died for us on the cross and we receive His righteousness. But after we receive His righteousness, what happens is when we live a life pleasing to the Lord, there are certain things that we receive rewards for. And just for a moment, I want you to imagine that you are in heaven. Because you've already put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, and that's the only reason why you're there. But you are in heaven, and Jesus is standing before you, and He's looking at you. And He comes up to you and He says, "Look, I want to talk to you right now." He goes, "Look, I'm so proud of you. You have done such a great job." And He uses the words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." And you're standing there, you're a little confused, and you're like, "Jesus, why are you this way with me?" And He says, "Because you fed me when I was hungry." He said, "You gave me something to drink when I was thirsty." He said, "You clothed me when I was naked." He said, "You cared for me when I was sick." And you stand there and you're stunned. You're like, "What in the world are you talking about, Jesus? I don't ever remember doing anything like that for you." And Jesus says, "No, you remember that one Saturday you were outside doing your lawn and you looked across your fence and you saw your neighbor who was struggling, your neighbor who was elderly and having a hard time doing his lawn, and from that point forward, you were there all the time helping him out. You blessed him. Jesus says, you did that to me. He says, do you remember that time or those seasons of life where you volunteered as a fourth grade small group a boys leader for church? Do you remember that? And every time you went there, it was good, but sometimes you walked away and you were frustrated because all the fourth grade boys wanted to do was potty talk. And you're like, did they get anything out of that? But you planted the truth into their lives. Jesus says, you did that to me. He's like, do you remember that time you were at work and you were listening to the coworker next to you and they were just having a bad day, they were struggling, and you could just tell they were moody, and you went up to them and you said, hey, are you okay? And they began to unload on you, and you had the patience, even though you were busy, and you listened to them. And at the end of the conversation, you asked to pray for them, and you did, and it just changed their whole attitude, their demeanor, and you pointed them to me. You remember when you blessed them that way? Jesus says, you did that to me. And then he asks you to bow down in front of him, and he takes a crown and he places it on your head. And he says, well done. You see, the Bible teaches us that there are at least five different crowns or rewards that we receive for the things that we do in this life. The question is, have you or are you living a life worth the rewards from God? Is your life pointed to pleasing and living for God? Some of you watching today, you're believers, man. You've put your faith and trust into Jesus. You know that you are a child of the one true King, but you really haven't done anything with your life yet when it comes to living for the Lord. And I believe this, that if that's the way that you end your life and you don't live your life for the Lord and you get to heaven one day, you're going to miss out on the opportunities of receiving those rewards. But some of you, man, you are living for the Lord, and you're going to be rewarded handsomely someday because you serve, you're gracious, you're loving, you're kind, you're Christ-like, and you will be rewarded. You see, what you believe about the afterlife, it determines how you live this life. See, it's important to understand eternity. It's critical to understand eternity because it should affect the way we live our life. It should affect the way we are at school and the way we are at home and the way we are at church and the way we are in our neighborhood. It should affect everything we do because we are living for the glory of the Lord. You see, we're just living in these tents. We're living for these tents, and we should filter everything we do knowing that we are living for the afterlife. You see, life is short. James tells us life is a vapor, and we're just passing through. So everything we say, everything we do, everything we think, our goal should be pleasing Him. To be pleasing Him. You're watching today and you would say, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christ follower, but if I'm going to be honest, as you're watching this, whether it's in your living room or in your office or wherever you might be right now on your screen that you're watching this on, and you say, I have not been living for eternity. That is not my priority. My priority is for living for this life, but not living for the Lord to please Him. And you say, you're right, I need to re-examine what I'm doing today. I think this is a great time right now to refocus and re-examine. And this is the opportunity right now as you're watching this, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this, to recommit to Jesus right now, saying, I'm all in. I'm living for eternity. Maybe you're watching right now and you were to say, if I were to stand for Jesus at the great white throne judgment and the book of life was open, you would be honest and you would say, I don't know if my name would be written in that book. See, as you study Scripture and you understand the Bible, we understand that we all of us, myself included, will be judged by our works here on earth. And what we will find out is that none of us are going to be good enough. None of us will do enough to be pleasing in the sight of God on our own. But the good news is this, that Jesus was. And because he was perfect, because he was good enough, he gave himself up for all of us when he died on the cross. He became our substitute. And you're here today and you're watching. And you say, that's me, man. I need to give my life to Christ. This is the moment. This is the time where you submit yourself to Jesus and you accept his free gift of salvation. Romans 10:9 tells us that if we believe in our heart and we confess with our mouth, Lord Jesus, what he did, who he was, that he is God, it says that we will be saved. Maybe this is your moment. This is your time to accept the free gift given to us by Jesus, who loves us dearly. Maybe you need to do that right now. You say, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to pray right now. If you want to submit your life to Christ and accept his free gift, I would ask you, wherever you're sitting, wherever you're at, wherever you're watching this, I would ask you to pray this prayer with me. More importantly, make a heart commitment to Jesus, giving him your life. Pray this with me. God, I know that I'm a sinner according to the Bible, that we all have sinned, we all fall short. But God, thank you for the hope that we have because of what your son Jesus did for us on the cross. When he lived a perfect life, but he substituted his life for us when he died on the cross. So Lord, today I believe that Jesus is who he said he was, that he is God. I believe that he is the Son of God. I believe that he gave himself for me, and I surrender my life to you today. God, I ask you for forgiveness of my sins, past, present, and future. Now give me the power to live a life pleasing to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If you prayed that prayer today, but more importantly, if that was a commitment that you made to God by accepting the free gift of salvation presented to you by Jesus Christ, guess what? You are a child of the one true King. You are a child of God now, and that is so awesome. Now it's time for you to take your next steps. Next step would be to be baptized, and we're going to be doing that here in the next month or two in the river. And so if you go to our connection card, which we'll have on the screen right here magically, see it's appearing right now. Go to our connection card, and we would love to hear from you. Let us know that you submitted your life, you gave your life to Jesus today. We want to give you some information about your next steps in your walk with Christ, how you can be baptized, how you can be connected to the body of Christ, the church. And even in this coronavirus crisis right now, there's ways to get connected. So we would love to help you out with that. For those of you who are Christ followers and Christians, man, it's time to live for the afterlife in this life. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you later. God bless.